I sit in my car outside the office building resignation letter, trembling in my hands, watching my former boss Marcus frantically calling through the glass doors. 6 months ago, I had been the company's golden child promised a creative director promotion for delivering their biggest client campaign flawlessly. Today, after watching that same promotion go to Marcus's golf buddy who had contributed absolutely nothing, I had quietly submitted my notice. The panic spreading across Marcus's face as he reads my letter tells me everything I need to know about my true value here. 3 months earlier, I had been riding high on what felt like the opportunity of a lifetime. My name is Eva, and at 28 years old, I was leading the most important project in our marketing agency's history. TechFlow Creative had landed Pinnacle Industries, a Fortune 500 company looking to rebrand their entire corporate image. The contract was worth $2.5 million, and Marcus had specifically chosen me to spearhead the campaign, Sarah Pinnacle. The company's demanding chief marketing officer had made it crystal clear during our first video conference that she expected nothing short of perfection. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to look right through the screen as she outlined her expectations. The previous agency had disappointed her with generic concepts and missed deadlines. She would not tolerate mediocrity. I threw myself into the project with every ounce of passion I possessed. My team consisted of Amy, a talented 24-year-old designer fresh out of art school with an eye for contemporary aesthetics. Jake, a 31-year-old copywriter whose wordplay could make even the most mundane products sound revolutionary, and Lisa, our 26-year-old account coordinator who managed client communications with diplomatic precision. The concept I developed was called Authentic Tomorrow. It combined Pinnacle Industries' commitment to sustainable manufacturing with cutting-edge visual design that spoke to both environmental consciousness and technological innovation. I spent countless nights researching emerging design trends, studying consumer psychology reports, and crafting presentation materials that would showcase our vision flawlessly. Those 60-hour weeks became my new normal. I arrived at the office by 6:30 each morning and rarely left before 9 at night. My small apartment in downtown Denver began to feel like a place I only visited to shower and change clothes. I survived on coffee energy bars and the adrenaline rush of creating something extraordinary. Amy struggled with the technical aspects of digital layout design, so I spent hours teaching her advanced software techniques. When Jake missed deadlines due to his tendency toward perfectionism, I helped him streamline his writing process while maintaining his creative standards. Lisa occasionally mixed up client communication protocols, and I patiently guided her through proper procedures to ensure Sarah Pinnacle received consistent professional updates. Marcus attended our client meetings, but his role seemed limited to nodding approvingly and taking credit for our team's innovations. During presentations, I would outline our strategic approach, explain the creative rationale, and address Sarah's detailed questions. Marcus would interject with generic business phrases like synergistic solutions and paradigm-shifting methodologies that added nothing substantive to our discussions. The campaign launch exceeded every metric we had established. Brand awareness for Pinnacle Industries increased by 30% within the first month. Their sustainability message resonated so powerfully with target demographics that sales jumped 50% in the second quarter. Industry publications featured our work as an example of how traditional manufacturing companies could successfully modernize their public image. Sarah Pinnacle called me directly to express her satisfaction with our results. Her typically stern demeanor softened as she explained how our campaign had transformed internal morale at Pinnacle Industries. Employees felt proud to work for a company with such a progressive, forward-thinking brand identity. She specifically requested that I remain the primary contact for all future projects between our companies. The recognition felt intoxicating. For the first time in my career, I had led a project from conception to completion that made a measurable impact on a major corporation. My confidence soared as colleagues congratulated me and industry contacts reached out to discuss my work. I began imagining myself in the creative director role that Marcus had promised, leading larger teams and taking on even more challenging campaigns. During our celebration dinner at an upscale steakhouse downtown, the entire team laughed and shared stories about our most stressful moments during the campaign. Amy had overcome her technical limitations and produced some of her best design work. Jake's copy had been quoted in marketing trade magazines. Lisa had managed client communications so effectively that Sarah Pinnacle complimented her professionalism multiple times. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Marcus casually mentioned that the creative director position might take longer to finalize than we had initially discussed. Budget constraints, he explained, while signaling the waiter to bring another bottle of the restaurant's most expensive wine required additional approval from senior partners. The promotion was still definitely happening, he assured me, but the timeline remained somewhat flexible. Something cold settled in my stomach as I watched him laugh and order dessert, seemingly unconcerned about the delay he had just announced. The celebration suddenly felt hollow, and I found myself wondering whether his promises had ever been genuine. 2 weeks later, Marcus called an all-hands meeting to announce quarterly promotions and organizational changes. I arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, expecting this to be my moment of professional triumph. The creative director announcement would validate all those late nights, weekend work sessions, and sacrifices I had made for the Pinnacle Industries campaign. The conference room gradually filled with my colleagues, their conversations buzzing with speculation about who would receive promotions. Amy gave me an encouraging smile from across the table, while Jake nodded confidently in my direction. Even employees from other departments seemed to expect my promotion, given the visibility and success of our recent campaign. Marcus entered the room carrying a folder of documents and wearing the self-satisfied expression he typically displayed before delivering what he considered good news. He began with routine updates about company performance, quarterly revenue figures, and client retention rates. The anticipation in the room was palpable as everyone waited for the promotion announcements. When Marcus finally reached that portion of the agenda, he smiled broadly and announced that he was pleased to introduce our new creative director, Brad Thompson. Brad stood up from the back of the room where I had not noticed him sitting, a tall man with perfectly styled brown hair and an expensive navy suit. Marcus explained that Brad brought valuable leadership experience from his previous role as founder of a digital marketing startup in Austin, Texas. The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as the reality of the situation crashed over me. Several colleagues glanced in my direction with expressions of confusion and sympathy. Amy's mouth fell open in shock, while Jake stared at his hands to avoid making eye contact with me. Brad had joined our company exactly 1 month ago, hired as a senior strategist, while I had been busy finalizing the Pinnacle Industries campaign. During his brief tenure, he had contributed nothing meaningful to any project. His startup had failed within 18 months of launching, according to the brief research I conducted on my phone during the remainder of the meeting. After the meeting concluded and people began filing out of the conference room, I approached Marcus to request a private conversation. He seemed genuinely surprised by my reaction, as if he could not understand why I might be upset about being passed over for a promotion I had clearly earned. His explanation about Brad's leadership experience and fresh perspective felt rehearsed and hollow. When I mentioned my successful delivery of the Pinnacle Industries campaign, Marcus dismissed it as great execution of team concepts, rather than acknowledging my role in developing the strategic vision. He suggested that I could learn valuable skills by working closely with Brad and supporting his transition into the creative director role. Later that afternoon, I discovered that Brad's salary as creative director was $40,000 more than my current compensation. This information came from Lisa, who had accidentally seen payroll documents while delivering contracts to the Human Resources Department. The financial disparity stung almost as much as the promotion itself, particularly given my 6 years of experience with the company compared to Brad's single month of employment. My teammates struggled to know how to react to the situation. Amy approached me privately to express her outrage, calling the decision completely unfair and politically motivated. Jake mentioned that several people had asked him whether I was planning to leave the company. Even employees from other departments made awkward small talk that danced around the obvious injustice of the promotion. The following day, Sarah Pinnacle called to discuss expanding our working relationship with additional projects. When I explained that Brad Thompson would now be serving as creative director and primary contact for her account, her tone shifted dramatically. She had never heard of Brad, had not been consulted about the leadership change, and expressed serious concerns about maintaining continuity on future campaigns. I assured her that I would remain involved in managing her projects and would work closely with Brad to ensure consistent quality and communication. Sarah made it clear that her confidence in our partnership was based specifically on her experience working with me, not with TechFlow Creative as an organization. If that relationship changed substantially, she would need to reconsider their ongoing commitment to our agency. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus had made this promotion decision without considering its potential impact on our most important client relationship. His focus seemed entirely on accommodating his personal relationship with Brad, rather than on what would best serve the company's interests. That evening, I stayed late to organize project files and prepare materials for Brad's transition into his new role. While gathering documents from the conference room, I overheard Marcus talking with Brad in his office nearby. The conversation was casual and friendly, filled with laughter and references to shared college experiences. Then I heard Marcus say something that made my blood run cold. He was bragging to Brad about his strategy of keeping me hungry for advancement to ensure continued high performance without the expense of actually promoting me. He described it as a management technique he had learned from his previous boss, explaining how ambitious employees would work harder when they believed promotion was just around the corner. I stood frozen in the hallway listening to Marcus and Brad laugh about psychological manipulation tactics, while I held a stack of the work that had made their comfortable positions possible. The betrayal felt complete and deliberate, not simply a matter of poor judgment or competing priorities. The following weeks brought a special kind of professional torture as I was assigned to train Brad while maintaining my full workload of client responsibilities. Marcus framed this arrangement as a temporary transition period that would benefit everyone involved. I would help Brad understand our processes and client relationships, while he would bring fresh leadership perspective to our projects. Brad's incompetence became apparent within days of his promotion. During our first strategy meeting, he confused basic marketing terminology, referring to demographic psychographics and behavioral target audiences in ways that made no sense. When Amy asked him about brand positioning strategies, he responded with generic business cliches that could have applied to any industry or company. His interactions with clients were equally problematic. During a video conference with a healthcare technology company, Brad suggested marketing strategies that would have violated federal regulations for medical device advertising. I had to interrupt repeatedly to redirect the conversation and prevent us from promising services we could not legally deliver. Despite these obvious deficiencies, I found myself working behind the scenes to correct Brad's mistakes and protect our client relationships. When he submitted a proposal with incorrect budget calculations, I revised the numbers before it reached the client. When his presentation materials contained factual errors about industry trends, I quietly provided corrected information and suggested he review the changes before our meeting. Sarah Pinnacle's frustration with the new arrangement became increasingly evident during our weekly check-in calls. She would ask detailed questions about campaign performance metrics that Brad could not answer, forcing me to step in and provide the information she needed. When she requested modifications to our creative approach, Brad would nod along without understanding the strategic implications of her suggestions. After one particularly uncomfortable conference call, Sarah called me directly on my personal phone to express her concerns. She explained that her confidence in our partnership was built on my expertise and understanding of her company's unique challenges. If Brad was going to serve as primary contact for future projects, she needed assurance that quality and communication standards would not decline. I found myself in an impossible position trying to maintain client satisfaction while supporting a supervisor who was clearly unqualified for his role. Marcus constantly reminded me of the importance of being a team player and supporting Brad's success. He suggested that my concerns about the new structure reflected resistance to change rather than legitimate professional observations. My personal life began to suffer under the stress of this impossible situation. David, my boyfriend of 2 years, noticed that I came home exhausted and frustrated every evening. Our conversations increasingly centered on my work problems, and I found it difficult to focus on anything else. Weekend plans were interrupted by urgent requests from Brad to help him prepare for Monday morning meetings. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake worrying about client relationships and project deadlines. I started eating irregular meals, grabbing fast food between meetings, or skipping lunch entirely when Brad needed last-minute assistance with presentations. My apartment, which had always been my sanctuary, began to feel like just another place where work stress followed me. Amy and Jake expressed their own frustrations with the new departmental structure during informal conversations in the break room. Amy mentioned that her creative contributions were being filtered through Brad, who often misunderstood her design concepts and presented them incorrectly to clients. Jake complained that his copy was being edited by someone who did not understand the strategic messaging behind his word choices. I began documenting my interactions with Brad and keeping detailed records of my contributions to various projects. Something told me that this information might become important if the situation continued to deteriorate. I saved emails, meeting notes, and client communications that demonstrated my ongoing role in maintaining account relationships and project quality. During this time, I discovered that Brad was receiving credit for campaign strategies I had developed before his arrival. In a company newsletter highlighting recent successes, Marcus attributed the Pinnacle Industries campaign results to Brad's leadership and innovative thinking. My name appeared only as part of the implementation team, with no mention of my role in developing the original strategic concept. The final straw in this phase came when I found an email that Marcus had accidentally forwarded to me instead of to one of the senior partners. In the message, Marcus described me as difficult to work with and not ready for leadership responsibilities. He cited my questions about Brad's qualifications and my concerns about client satisfaction as evidence of poor attitude and resistance to organizational change. Reading that email felt like a physical blow. Marcus was not simply failing to recognize my contributions, he was actively undermining my professional reputation to justify his poor decision-making. He was rewriting the narrative to make my competence appear to be insubordination and my dedication look like problematic behavior. I printed a copy of the email and added it to my growing file of documentation. Whatever happened next, I wanted a clear record of how this situation had developed and how my attempts to maintain professional standards had been twisted into character flaws by someone who should have been supporting my career development. The quarterly performance review meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in early October. I had prepared extensively compiling data on campaign results, client satisfaction scores, and project completion timelines. Despite everything that had happened with Brad's promotion, I believed my measurable contributions would speak for themselves. Marcus began the review by acknowledging my technical skills and work ethic, but then shifted to discussing what he characterized as attitude problems and collaboration challenges. He suggested that my resistance to the new departmental structure demonstrated inflexibility and poor adaptability to change. My questions about Brad's decision-making were framed as undermining team cohesion. I sat in stunned silence as Marcus criticized my professional demeanor while ignoring the quantifiable results I had delivered. The Pinnacle Industries campaign success was mentioned only briefly described as a team effort that benefited from Brad's oversight, despite the fact that Brad had not been employed by our company when the campaign was developed and launched. The most insulting moment came when Marcus suggested that my concerns about maintaining client relationships reflected an inability to trust other team members and delegate responsibilities effectively. He recommended that I focus on supporting Brad's leadership rather than attempting to maintain direct client contact that might confuse reporting structures. Later that afternoon, we held a presentation for senior executives about our department's recent achievements. Brad stood at the front of the conference room using slides I had created and data I had compiled to discuss the success of campaigns I had managed. When the executives asked detailed questions about strategic decisions and implementation challenges, Brad provided vague responses that demonstrated no real understanding of the work involved. During the question and answer session, senior partner Catherine Walsh asked about specific metrics for the Pinnacle Industries campaign. Brad stumbled through an incomplete answer before I quietly provided the accurate information. Catherine thanked me for the clarification, but the credit for the overall presentation remained with Brad. After the meeting, I overheard two executives discussing Brad's performance. One mentioned that his answers seemed superficial and wondered whether he truly understood the strategic thinking behind our recent successes. The other suggested that the team members seemed to be carrying most of the substantive knowledge, while Brad provided high-level direction. The breaking point came the following Monday when Marcus assigned me to report directly to Brad on the expansion of my own Pinnacle Industries project. The client had requested additional services based on our initial campaign success, and Marcus decided this would be an excellent opportunity for Brad to demonstrate his leadership capabilities by overseeing the project development. I was instructed to brief Brad on all client communications, seek his approval for strategic decisions, and include him in all meetings with Sarah Pinnacle. Essentially, I would be doing the same work I had been doing independently for months, but now with an additional layer of oversight from someone who understood neither the client's needs nor the strategic approach we had developed. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and called my sister Rachel, who worked as a human resources director for a technology company in Seattle. Through tears of frustration, I explained the situation and asked for her advice about my options. Rachel listened patiently and then asked me a question that changed everything. She asked whether I was staying at this job because I loved the work or because I was afraid to leave. When I started to explain about career security and professional advancement, she interrupted me gently. "Eva," she said, "you're describing a hostage situation, not a career." Her words hit me like cold water. I realized that I had been so focused on fighting for recognition and fair treatment that I had stopped considering whether this environment was where I wanted to spend my professional life. I was enabling a toxic system by continuing to excel despite consistent mistreatment. That evening, I scheduled a meeting with Janet, our human resources director, to discuss my concerns about the departmental changes and their impact on client relationships. I presented my documentation carefully and professionally, focusing on business outcomes rather than personal grievances. Janet listened politely but made it clear that the company supported Marcus's leadership decisions and Brad's qualifications for the creative director role. She suggested that my concerns might reflect difficulty adjusting to new reporting structures rather than legitimate issues with organizational effectiveness. Any further complaints about Brad or Marcus would be viewed as insubordination. Walking back to my desk after that meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The organization had made its priorities clear, and those priorities did not include recognizing my contributions or maintaining the client relationships I had built. I could continue fighting a battle that was already lost, or I could choose a different path entirely. That weekend, I discovered something that crystallized my decision completely. While reviewing project files to prepare for the following week, I found evidence that Brad had been secretly meeting with Sarah Pinnacle's team to discuss potentially moving the Pinnacle Industries account to a competing agency where he had connections. He was essentially attempting to steal our biggest client while still collecting his salary from TechFlow Creative. The meetings had been positioned as informal industry networking, but email exchanges made it clear that Brad was positioning himself as the key relationship holder who could facilitate a smooth transition to the other agency. He was planning to use my work and my client relationships to benefit himself while leaving TechFlow Creative and Marcus to deal with the consequences. This discovery removed any remaining doubt about my course of action. I was not dealing with simple incompetence or poor judgment. I was watching someone actively undermine the company that employed him with the unwitting support of a supervisor who valued personal relationships over professional competence. On Sunday evening, I drafted my resignation letter. It was brief, professional, and gracious. I thanked Marcus for the opportunities I had received, expressed appreciation for my colleagues, and provided standard 2 weeks' notice. I included no specific reasons for my departure and no criticism of the company's decisions. My dignity and self-respect had become more important than career security or the hope of eventual recognition. I was ready to walk away calmly and let Marcus discover the true value of what he was losing. Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity. I had spent the weekend meticulously organizing my project files, completing pending assignments, and preparing detailed transition documents for my replacement. Every client communication was up to date, every deadline was met, and every piece of work reflected the professional standards I had maintained throughout my tenure at TechFlow Creative. I arrived at the office at my usual time, 6:30 in the morning, when the building was still quiet, and most of my colleagues had not yet begun their commute. The early morning silence gave me space to review my resignation letter one final time and steel myself for the conversation ahead. The letter was perfect in its simplicity. I expressed gratitude for the opportunities I had received during my employment, highlighted my pride in contributing to successful client campaigns, and provided notice that my final day of work would be 2 weeks from the date of submission. There were no accusations, no detailed explanations, and no emotional language that might be construed as unprofessional. Marcus typically arrived at the office around 8:30, giving him time to review his schedule and prepare for morning meetings. I planned to deliver my resignation during his brief window between arrival and his first client conference call. The timing would prevent a lengthy discussion while ensuring he had adequate notice to begin planning for my departure. At 8:45, I knocked on Marcus's office door and asked whether he had a few minutes to discuss an important matter. He gestured for me to sit down while he finished reading an email, his attention still focused on his computer screen. When he finally looked up, I handed him the resignation letter and waited quietly for his reaction. His initial response was dismissive. He glanced at the letter briefly and suggested that we schedule a meeting later in the week to discuss whatever concerns had prompted this decision. When I explained that the resignation was effective immediately and not a negotiation tactic, his demeanor shifted dramatically. Marcus read the letter again more carefully this time and asked directly whether this decision was related to Brad's promotion or other recent organizational changes. I maintained that my reasons were personal and professional, declining to provide specific details that might create additional workplace tension during my transition period. What happened next revealed the true scope of my value to TechFlow Creative. Marcus began making frantic phone calls to determine how my departure would impact current projects and client relationships. Within an hour, it became clear that my institutional knowledge and client connections were far more extensive than he had realized. Sarah Pinnacle was scheduled to call that afternoon to finalize details for the expanded campaign we had been developing. Marcus discovered that he had no meaningful understanding of her requirements, our strategic approach, or the technical specifications that governed our work with Pinnacle Industries. Brad was completely unprepared to manage the call independently. Amy and Jake stopped by my desk throughout the morning to express shock about my resignation and ask questions about future projects they had assumed I would be leading. Their reactions confirmed that Marcus had failed to communicate any transition plans or consider how my departure would affect ongoing work. By lunchtime, word of my resignation had spread throughout the office. Colleagues approached me with expressions of surprised concern and, in several cases, admiration for my decision to leave. Lisa mentioned that other employees had been discussing whether they should also consider looking for new opportunities, given the recent changes in leadership and company culture. Marcus made increasingly desperate attempts to convince me to reconsider my decision. He offered to accelerate discussions about my own promotion timeline, suggested a salary increase to demonstrate the company's appreciation for my contributions, and even hinted that Brad's role might be restructured to better accommodate my expertise and client relationships. Each offer confirmed what I already knew. My value had never been in question. The issue was that Marcus had taken my contributions for granted while prioritizing personal relationships and political considerations over professional competence. His panic now reflected belated recognition of consequences he should have anticipated. I maintained my professional composure throughout these conversations, thanking Marcus for his offers while explaining that my decision was final. I had already committed to a new direction for my career, I told him, and could not be swayed by last-minute attempts to address problems that had been developing for months. The afternoon brought a series of crisis meetings as Marcus attempted to assess the full impact of my departure on client relationships and project timelines. Brad sat quietly in these meetings, clearly overwhelmed by the realization that he would soon be responsible for managing accounts and relationships he did not understand. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from Catherine Walsh, one of the senior partners I had briefly met during company-wide presentations. She asked whether I could spare a few minutes for a private conversation in her office on the top floor of our building. Catherine's office was elegantly appointed with modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. She offered me coffee and began our conversation by acknowledging that she had been observing recent developments in our department with considerable interest and some concern. Her next words changed everything. Catherine explained that she was launching an independent consulting firm focused on strategic marketing for large corporations, and she had been watching my work with Pinnacle Industries and other clients. She had been particularly impressed by my ability to develop innovative campaigns that delivered measurable business results. The opportunity she offered was extraordinary. A creative director position with her new firm, a salary that was $20,000 higher than Brad's current compensation, and equity participation that could provide significant long-term financial benefits. Most importantly, she promised a collaborative work environment based on mutual respect and professional merit rather than office politics. Catherine had been planning to approach me about this opportunity regardless of my situation at TechFlow Creative, but my resignation letter had accelerated her timeline. She wanted to move quickly to secure my commitment before other agencies became aware of my availability. As I walked back to my desk after accepting Catherine's offer, I felt a profound sense of relief and vindication. My decision to maintain professional integrity rather than tolerate ongoing mistreatment had been validated in the most concrete way possible. I would not only escape the toxic environment Marcus had created, but also advance my career beyond what would have been possible by staying and fighting for recognition. The final hours of my day were spent organizing my personal belongings and saying goodbye to colleagues who had become genuine friends during my tenure at TechFlow Creative. Amy and Jake both expressed interest in staying in touch and potentially exploring opportunities at Catherine's new firm in the future. Marcus made one last attempt to retain me as I prepared to leave the building. Standing in the lobby, he offered an immediate promotion to creative director with authority over Brad and complete autonomy in managing client relationships. The desperation in his voice was evident, and several other employees witnessed his pleading tone. I thanked him sincerely for the offer and wished him success in managing the transition ahead. There was no satisfaction in his obvious distress, only confirmation that I had made the right choice by choosing my own professional future rather than waiting for others to recognize my value. My first week at Walsh Consulting felt like stepping into a completely different professional universe. Catherine had secured office space in a modern building with natural light collaborative workspaces and technology resources that made my previous environment seem cramped and outdated. More importantly, the culture emphasized respect, transparency, and recognition for individual contributions. Catherine introduced me to the team as creative director and made it clear that my experience and expertise were valuable assets the firm was fortunate to acquire. During our strategy meetings, my input was actively solicited and thoughtfully considered. When I presented campaign concepts, colleagues asked intelligent questions and offered constructive feedback rather than simply nodding and taking credit later. Meanwhile, the situation at TechFlow Creative deteriorated rapidly. Marcus called me repeatedly during my first few days at Walsh Consulting, ostensibly to ask questions about client preferences and project specifications. In reality, these calls revealed the extent to which Brad was struggling to manage relationships and responsibilities he had never understood. The Sarah Pinnacle account reached a crisis point within 48 hours of my departure. She had called for her scheduled conference call about the campaign expansion, only to discover that Brad could not answer basic questions about timeline, budget, or creative direction. When she asked to speak with me directly, Marcus had to explain that I was no longer with the company. Sarah's reaction was swift and decisive. She terminated TechFlow Creative's contract immediately, citing lack of confidence in the new leadership and concerns about continuity of service. The Pinnacle Industries account represented nearly 30% of our former department's annual revenue, and its loss created immediate financial pressure on the entire agency. Other clients began expressing similar concerns as word spread about my departure and the circumstances surrounding Brad's promotion. A healthcare technology company that had been considering expanding their contract with TechFlow Creative decided to seek proposals from competing agencies. A financial services firm requested a meeting to discuss transitioning their account to a different marketing partner. Amy called me during my second week at Walsh Consulting to report that the office atmosphere had become tense and uncomfortable. Marcus was working longer hours trying desperately to salvage client relationships he had never bothered to understand. Brad appeared increasingly overwhelmed and defensive as his limitations became undeniable to everyone around him. Jake reached out as well, asking whether Catherine's firm might have opportunities for experienced copywriters. He explained that several team members were updating their resumes and networking with contacts at other agencies. The departmental culture that had once been collaborative and supportive had become stressful and uncertain. Within 6 weeks of my departure, Brad's employment at TechFlow Creative ended abruptly. Amy told me that he had been terminated following a disastrous presentation to a potential client that resulted in not only losing the new business opportunity, but also prompting an existing client to question their ongoing relationship with the agency. The official explanation for Brad's departure was that his leadership style had not aligned well with the company's culture and client expectations. Marcus privately admitted to Catherine during an industry networking event that the promotion had been a mistake based on personal relationships rather than professional qualifications. Marcus himself faced increasingly serious questions from senior partners about the department's declining performance and client retention problems. Catherine mentioned that she had heard through industry contacts that his position was being evaluated and his authority significantly reduced while the company searched for more effective leadership. The poetic justice of the situation was not lost on me, but I found that my satisfaction came primarily from my own professional growth rather than from witnessing others' failures. At Walsh Consulting, I was developing innovative campaigns for clients who appreciated creativity and strategic thinking. My work was challenging, rewarding, and properly recognized. Amy and Jake both submitted applications to join Catherine's firm, and I was pleased to provide enthusiastic recommendations for both of them. Their talents had been underutilized at TechFlow Creative, and I looked forward to collaborating with them in an environment that valued their contributions appropriately. David noticed a dramatic improvement in my mood and energy level during this period. Our relationship had suffered during the stressful final months at TechFlow Creative, but now we were able to enjoy evenings and weekends together without the constant backdrop of workplace frustration. He expressed admiration for my courage in walking away from a secure position to pursue better opportunities. Sarah Pinnacle contacted me directly through Catherine to discuss the possibility of continuing our working relationship through Walsh Consulting. She explained that the campaign work we had done together represented some of the most effective marketing her company had ever implemented, and she was eager to explore additional projects with our new firm. This conversation led to Walsh Consulting's first major client contract, a comprehensive rebranding initiative that would be even more extensive than the original Pinnacle Industries campaign. Sarah specifically requested that I serve as lead strategist, citing her confidence in my understanding of her company's unique needs and market position. 6 months after my resignation from TechFlow Creative, Catherine revealed something that provided the final piece of understanding about recent events. She had been secretly contracted by the parent company that owned TechFlow Creative to conduct an independent evaluation of departmental performance and leadership effectiveness. My departure, she explained, had been the final piece of evidence needed to recommend significant organizational changes. Marcus's handling of the Brad promotion, his failure to retain key talent, and the subsequent loss of major clients had demonstrated fundamental problems with his management approach. The parent company had asked Catherine to identify potential replacement leadership for the marketing department, and her recommendation was that they needed someone with both strategic vision and team-building capabilities. Marcus would be reassigned to a business development role with no direct supervisory responsibilities. As I reflected on this revelation, I realized that my decision to leave TechFlow Creative had not only opened better opportunities for my own career, but had also contributed to positive changes that would benefit the colleagues I had left behind. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was indeed walking away and allowing the consequences of poor decisions to become apparent to those in authority. 1 year after submitting my resignation letter, I stood in the conference room of Walsh Consulting, looking out at a team of 12 talented professionals who had joined our rapidly growing firm. Amy sat at the table reviewing design concepts for our latest campaign, while Jake led a discussion about messaging strategies with 2 new copywriters we had recently hired. The contrast with my final months at TechFlow Creative could not have been more dramatic. Catherine had promoted me to Senior Creative Director with responsibility for expanding our client services and building strategic partnerships with other agencies. My role involved not only developing campaigns, but also mentoring junior team members and contributing to the firm's overall business strategy. Every day brought new challenges that utilized my skills and pushed me to grow professionally. The morning brought news that completed the transformation of my former workplace. Lisa, who had remained at TechFlow Creative as account coordinator, called to tell me that Marcus had been officially terminated and replaced by Janet, the former human resources director, who had proven herself capable of effective leadership and client relationship management. Brad had struggled to find new employment after word spread through Denver's marketing community about his brief and unsuccessful tenure as creative director. His failed startup and the circumstances of his departure from TechFlow Creative made him an unattractive candidate for senior positions at established agencies. Meanwhile, Walsh Consulting had secured contracts with 6 major clients, including 3 former TechFlow Creative accounts that had followed our team to the new firm. Our reputation for delivering innovative campaigns with measurable results had spread throughout the business community, and we were regularly invited to pitch for high-profile projects. Sarah Pinnacle had become our strongest advocate and most valuable source of referrals. The success of our ongoing partnership had led to recognition from industry organizations and features in marketing trade publications. She frequently mentioned our work during conference presentations and networking events, describing our collaboration as a model for effective agency-client relationships. Amy and Jake had both thrived in the supportive environment Catherine had created. Amy's design portfolio had expanded to include award-winning work for technology companies and nonprofit organizations. Jake's copywriting had been recognized by the American Marketing Association for its creativity and effectiveness in reaching diverse audiences. During our weekly team meeting, Catherine announced that Walsh Consulting had been selected as marketing agency of record for a Fortune 100 company looking to completely rebrand their corporate identity. The contract was worth over $5 million and would require expanding our team by 50% over the following 6 months. As the meeting concluded and team members dispersed to their various projects, I remained in the conference room to reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The decision to walk away from TechFlow Creative had felt risky and uncertain at the time, but it had led to opportunities that exceeded anything I could have imagined while fighting for recognition in my previous position. My relationship with David had grown stronger as my professional satisfaction increased. We had moved in together 6 months earlier and were discussing plans for our future with optimism and excitement rather than the stress and uncertainty that had characterized our conversations during my final year at TechFlow Creative. That afternoon, I received a call from Monica, a 26-year-old marketing coordinator who worked for a large consulting firm downtown. She had gotten my contact information from a mutual friend and wanted advice about dealing with workplace challenges that sounded remarkably familiar to my own experience. Monica described a situation where her contributions were consistently undervalued. Her supervisor took credit for her innovative ideas, and she was passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified candidates who had better relationships with senior management. She felt trapped between staying in a comfortable but unfulfilling position and taking the risk of seeking opportunities elsewhere. I listened carefully to her story and then shared my own experience, emphasizing the importance of documentation, professional integrity, and strategic thinking when facing workplace injustice. Most importantly, I told her that sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued was not fighting harder for recognition, but having the courage to walk away when your worth was not appreciated. Monica's situation reminded me of how many talented professionals, particularly women, struggle with toxic workplace cultures that prioritize politics over performance. I realized that my experience could serve as both cautionary tale and source of inspiration for others facing similar challenges. Catherine approached me later that week with a proposal that would formalize my role as mentor and advocate for professional development within our industry. She suggested that Walsh Consulting sponsor a monthly networking series focused on supporting women in marketing and advertising careers, with me serving as the primary organizer and facilitator. The networking series launched 3 months later with an event attended by over 60 women from agencies throughout the Denver area. We discussed strategies for advancing careers, building professional networks, and navigating workplace challenges with integrity and confidence. The positive response led to similar events in other cities as our reputation for supporting professional development spread. On the anniversary of my resignation from TechFlow Creative, I received an unexpected email from Marcus. He had taken a business development position with a smaller agency and wanted to apologize for his handling of the promotion situation and its aftermath. He acknowledged that his decision had been based on personal considerations rather than professional merit and expressed regret about losing such a valuable team member. His message was sincere and thoughtful, reflecting what appeared to be genuine understanding of the mistakes he had made. I responded graciously, thanking him for his apology and wishing him success in his new role. There was no satisfaction in holding grudges, only appreciation for how far we had all traveled from that difficult period. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I thought about the lesson I had learned through this experience and wanted to share with others facing similar challenges. True success comes not from enduring mistreatment for the sake of security, but from having the courage to walk away when your values and worth are not recognized. Trusting that better opportunities await those who maintain their integrity. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not fighting or arguing, but quietly removing yourself and watching those who undervalued you realize their mistake too late. When you know your worth and refuse to accept less than you deserve, the universe has a way of providing opportunities that exceed your expectations. I want to know what you think about Eva's story. Have you ever found yourself in a workplace situation where your contributions were undervalued or taken for granted? What advice would you give to someone facing similar challenges about when to fight for recognition versus when to walk away? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If Eva's journey resonated with you, please like this video to help others discover this story. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about overcoming workplace challenges and finding professional fulfillment. And share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to value their own worth and pursue better opportunities. Thank you for listening to Eva's story, and I wish you the courage to recognize your own value and the wisdom to know when it's time to walk away towards something better. Remember that your worth is not determined by others' recognition, but by your willingness to honor your own integrity and pursue the opportunities you deserve.